The night my neighbor invited me for a midnight swim, I thought she was simply trying to escape the unbearable heat. I had no idea that when she stepped into my backyard that night, she was carrying a secret heavier than the summer sky above us. And when she quietly told me she hadn't brought a swimsuit, I almost laughed, until I saw the tears in her eyes. That was the moment I realized this wasn't really about swimming. It was about loneliness. It was about grief. And sometimes, it is about finding one person who will stay beside you when everyone else has already walked away. That summer had been brutal. For days, the temperature had remained so high that the walls of my little house seemed to hold the heat even after sunset. The electricity had gone out several times, the fans barely moved the hot air, and sleep had become something I remembered rather than something I experienced. Every night, I would sit outside beside the small swimming pool in my backyard, listening to the insects and watching the empty houses across the street. One of those houses belonged to my neighbor, Emma. She had moved in 3 months earlier. I knew almost nothing about her. She was quiet, polite, and always seemed to be carrying groceries alone. Sometimes I saw her sitting on her porch long after midnight, staring at the street as though she was waiting for someone who would never come. We had exchanged little more than greetings, but there was something about her that made me wonder what story she was hiding behind that tired smile. Then, just after midnight one unbearably hot night, I heard 3 soft knocks on my back door. When I opened it, Emma was standing there. She looked nervous. She glanced toward the pool and then back at me before asking if I was still awake. I told her that sleep was impossible in that heat. She gave a small, almost embarrassed smile and asked whether I wanted to go swimming. I was surprised, but I agreed. She walked toward the pool with me, but then suddenly stopped. Her eyes dropped toward the water. She admitted she hadn't brought a swimsuit. I told her it didn't matter and that we could simply sit beside the pool and cool our feet in the water. She nodded, but she didn't sit down. Instead, she looked at the dark water and whispered that she hadn't come because of the heat. She had come because she didn't want to be alone. Before I continue, if stories about kindness, second chances, and unexpected connections touch your heart, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope tonight, leave a comment, and subscribe to Ripple of Kindness for more stories about second chances and the people who quietly change our lives. Emma finally sat beside the pool. For several minutes, neither of us said anything. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like the kind of silence 2 tired people share when neither has enough strength left to pretend everything is fine. Eventually, she told me about her husband. He had died 6 months earlier after a long illness. They had spent nearly 20 years together. Their house had been filled with photographs, music, unfinished plans, and little routines that had once seemed ordinary. Then one morning, everything changed. She woke up beside an empty pillow and realized she would never again hear him complain about the coffee being too strong. She had moved to our neighborhood because the old house was unbearable. Every room reminded her of him. But the new house was worse in a different way. It contained no memories at all. She said the silence was frightening. She had spent months telling people she was okay because she was tired of watching their faces change whenever she admitted she wasn't. Friends had stopped calling because they didn't know what to say. Family members lived far away. Everyone assumed time was healing her. But time, she explained, hadn't healed anything. It had simply taught her how to hide the pain better. I listened. I didn't try to give her advice. Sometimes people don't need advice. They need someone willing to sit beside them while the sadness passes through. That night, we eventually stepped into the shallow end of the pool fully clothed. We laughed about how ridiculous we looked, and for the first time, I saw Emma smile without forcing it. She told me that her husband had once loved swimming at night. They would sneak into hotel pools during vacations, sit beneath the stars, and talk until sunrise. She hadn't entered a pool since he died. Until that night. The water was cool against the heat, and the sky above us was unusually clear. We floated quietly while she told me stories about her marriage. Some were funny. Some were heartbreaking. And some made her laugh so hard that she had to cover her face. For a few hours, the woman who had been drowning in grief seemed to breathe again. But just before sunrise, something changed. Emma climbed out of the pool and stood there staring at the empty chair beside mine. She began crying. She said she felt guilty for laughing. She believed that enjoying even one peaceful night somehow meant she was forgetting her husband. I told her that love doesn't disappear when the sadness becomes lighter. Grief wasn't a prison she had to remain inside to prove that she still cared. Her husband wouldn't want her to spend the rest of her life punishing herself for surviving him. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said something I would never forget. She said, "I think I've been waiting for someone to give me permission to live again." I told her she didn't need anyone's permission. She just needed to take the first step. The next morning, Emma went home. I expected that to be the end of it. It wasn't. The following week, she knocked on my door carrying a box of homemade cookies. She thanked me for that night. Then she told me she had finally opened one of the boxes she had refused to unpack since moving. Inside were photographs of her and her husband. She had spent hours looking through them. For the first time, she hadn't cried the entire time. She smiled. That small change became the beginning of something bigger. Emma started volunteering at a local community center. She began attending a grief support group. She planted flowers in her backyard because her husband had always wanted a garden. Slowly, the house that had once looked abandoned began to feel alive. And our midnight swim became a quiet tradition. Not every week. Not even every month. Only whenever one of us needed to remember that life could still hold beautiful moments. Years later, I still think about that first night. I thought Emma had invited me into the pool because she wanted to escape the heat. In reality, she was asking for something much more important. She was asking not to disappear. And sometimes, kindness isn't about solving someone's problems. Sometimes it is simply noticing that someone is hurting and refusing to leave them alone with it. Emma taught me that grief doesn't mean love has ended. It means love was important enough to leave a permanent mark. And she taught me something else. A person can lose almost everything and still find a reason to begin again. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who may be quietly struggling, and subscribe to Ripple of Kindness. You never know when a simple story, a simple act of kindness, or a few minutes of someone's time might become the reason another person chooses to keep going. Before we end, I want you to leave a comment with this sentence: everyone deserves someone who stays. Because somewhere tonight, there may be an Emma sitting alone in the dark, believing nobody would notice if she disappeared. Maybe your kindness can remind someone that they matter. And maybe that is what second chances really are. Not forgetting the pain, but learning that even after the darkest night, there can still be a morning worth waking up for.